And would you pray with me? Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, you who are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So, this is the third in a series of sermons about looking to the past. Not only looking to the past to see what was first done, but looking to the past to see how some people experienced that and were touched by that, so that we can then look in our own lives and see how we can apply some of that learning into our lives. Now we're here on a day that is Father's Day, on a day when we want to recognize graduates who have accomplished something significant, who have gone through a time in school and now are moving on to something new. A time when perhaps they will not be as closely sheltered by their families and will have to use the things that they've been taught in order to make their own decisions in places that are brand new and with people and communities that are brand new. And so we need to know that the things that we do, the decisions that we make, have consequences. Sometimes long-lasting consequences, like the choices that Abraham and Sarah made thousands of years ago. At the beginning of the community that we call Judaism, those who follow God through their connection with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, God made a promise to Abraham and to Sarah. In fact, changed their names from Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah so they would know that God was with them and would be caring for them and would provide for them and was good on the promise that God made. And God made this promise to a couple of old people. Abraham and Sarah were about 100 years old when God said to them, "You will have a child." Sarah laughed. We talked about that last week, didn't we? And you can imagine that it would be kind of hard for them to understand, how in the world can this happen? It even mentions that Sarah had already passed her time. But God was going to make good on that promise. But Sarah especially, and Abraham with her, made this decision to, well, what if God doesn't make good on it? I think that we should help God out a little bit here, because God isn't quite capable of taking care of things the way that God really should. And so, Abraham, why don't you have a child with my handmaiden, Hagar? That'll solve everything, won't it? So that's what happened. Another child was there. One who was loved by his father. One who was cared for by that community. And then God made good on God's promise. And they actually had a child that was from Abraham and Sarah. And that first child, what did they do with him? What could they do with him? Sarah wanted him sent away, and And Abraham wasn't sure about it, but God said, you go ahead. Send him away, and I will take care of him. And at least in the histories of that part of the world, we know that those children of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob came to be the people of Israel. The other child was also quite prolific at producing children, evidently. And they peopled another part of the nation surrounding that area. And we have conflicts in that area to this very day because of that. The United States is even embroiled in one of those conflicts at this moment. The consequence of not trusting God in this quite outlandish promise, but one that God was perfectly willing and able to perform, is important. And if they decide to do it our own way, we know that there will be consequences that are probably not something that we want. In the second passage, the early church is struggling with this idea of sinfulness and grace. And they're even saying, well, grace is a great thing. So why don't I go out and sin a whole bunch, and so God can be very graceful to me. And God's going to forgive me no matter what I do, right? Paul tries to teach them, wait a second. That's not what it's about. This is about living in God, living in community. And living in God and living in community, God's community, means that we love our neighbor as we love ourselves. So we first have to love ourselves. That's really important. And that's one of the things that fathers can do. Moms too. Families. Church families. To help all of us to know how amazing we are. Now, we all know that Hannah's pretty amazing, right? Yeah. But did we know before it happened? Did she even know before it happened that she was going to get a home run finally? And it was all the bat's fault, right? You didn't have to do anything. It was the new bat that did that, right? No, it was the skills and the belief in herself that she could do that. And that came from her mom and from her dad and from people around her, her coach, her teachers, all sorts of people. When we live in community, it isn't about doing whatever we want and thinking that people will forgive us. It's about knowing who we are and how valuable we are and how consequential we can be in the world around us. And we want to have good consequences around us rather than not so good consequences. We are taught by so many people. And those truths began thousands of years ago. And we grow up within communities of nurture and care. And I think all of us can be parents to one another. Number one, we can teach each other how valuable we are. Help us to be looking at each other in a way that God looks at us. To see how cherished, how precious each one of us are. To see the consequences that we can come up with. That when we treat one another well, when we live in celebration of life, good things can happen. That doesn't guarantee it. But then we have the final issue. It comes from the gospel lesson. And that tells us that there will be conflict. Sometimes the consequence of us believing in ourselves and doing the best that we can at loving each other, taking up our cross, believing that every person has value, will put us in conflict with other people that we love. And it will come to a choice between standing for that loved one or standing for God. And we can have the strength and the nurture and the value to stand for God, never letting go of our love for that other one. But those conflicts will exist. That's a part of being human. And that's a part of the cross that we bear. But that way of life is better. As the song went, your way is better. And we can live in joy that way. And maybe along the way we get a few home runs, don't we? Would you pray with me? Beloved God, thank you. Thank you especially for the graduates that we have in our midst today. Help us to celebrate them. Help them to know that even if they haven't talked to some of these folks for years, that there is such a huge amount of wisdom in this place. People who have made mistakes and learned from them. People who can love and affirm and nurture others. Help us to be that community for one another and help each of us to tap into that wonderful pool of wisdom in our lives.